The next part of our walk takes us down the track that runs alongside the cemetery at Hooge Crater. And Hooge itself sits on one of the ridge lines that surrounds the city of Ypres. And when we talk about these ridge lines, we're only talking about positions that were tens of metres above sea level. So we're not talking about any kind of dramatic feature, but on a landscape that was essentially flat, even tens of metres could give you an advantage. And for most of the war here at places like Hooge, it's the Germans that have that advantage. And this track takes us down to an area that in July of 1915 saw the first use of flamethrowers against British troops in the Great War. I've walked down to a position that's marked on the trench maps as Zouave Wood. Zouave was a French colonial soldier with a very elaborate uniform, and they fought here in the battles of 1914, and the position was named after them because sadly in some of their attacks their dead lay unburied on the battlefield close to this area of woodland. So that's how this bit of wood got its name. It was one of the few woods in this area not to be replanted after the First World War, but you can pick it out quite easily on the landscape today because it forms a kind of triangle shape on the ground where the wood once stood. And it was here on the 30th of July 1915 that the Germans used flamethrowers against British troops for the very first time. Now, flamethrowers were pre-war technology. The Germans actually used them against the French south of Verdun in 1914, for example. But by 1915, they developed man-portable flamethrowers, so tanks of fuel with a long lance, a rod, and a tube coming into the tank that could be used to take the flame across the battlefield and pour it into the trenches. And you can only got to imagine the close confines of trenches in the Great War being filled with liquid fire. The end result is really unimaginable. And here, on the 30th of July 1915, they were used against men from the 14th Light Division, battalions of the King's Royal Rifle Corps, the Rifle Brigade, the Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry, with devastating effect. And one account of that action describes it as follows. Second Lieutenant G.V. Carey of the Rifle Brigade wrote, "There was a sudden hissing sound and a bright crimson glare over the Hooge crater, which turned the whole scene red. As I looked, I saw 3 or 4 distinct jets of flame, like a line of power hoses spreading fire, not water, shoot across my fire trench." And that first use of flame by the Germans here was used with devastating effect against these men of the Rifle Brigade and the King's Royal Rifle Corps and the Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry. Most of the dead from this action do not have a known grave. They're commemorated on the Menin Memorial to the Missing back in Ypres. But as we walk down through Hooge Crater Cemetery, we see so many of those unknown soldiers. Many of them could well be those who fell here in this flame attack of July 1915. Flamethrowers continue to be used by the Germans for much of the rest of the war. We've seen an insight into just how devastating they are in the recent interpretation of Remarks All Quiet on the Western Front with the new film, where we see French soldiers using flamethrowers. The British did not really develop man-portable flamethrowers in the First World War. They developed flame projectors that had to be dug in and sent huge jets of flame across the battlefield. But that proved to be really ineffective. And instead they developed a new kind of canister for the Livens projector, which was a trench mortar designed by Major Livens of the Royal Engineers and used to send gas in sausage-shaped projectiles across the battlefield. But instead they put a kind of napalm-style substance in it, and they were called oil drums. And these things could be fired at the enemy positions, saturating the whole ground in liquid fire with totally and utterly devastating effects on those positions. So flame really, and flamethrowers, weapons I think that we will ever associate with the history of the Great War.